For coming and kind of listening to us talk a little bit about post-pandemic return to the office and what that actually means. So I suppose a lot of people have been working from home, and we're going to discuss this morning kind of what can your office do for you if you're faced with that working from home versus traveling into the office kind of dynamic. Lots of corporates are dealing with that balance and that kind of hybrid, if that kind of terminology to describe it. It's already an aged out buzzword. But yeah, so that's kind of the theme that we're going to be talking about. So I lead Unify Energy. Unify Energy is a really innovative spin-out brand. We're a challenger brand in the energy market, and we specifically focus on bringing more to the traditional kind of multi-tenanted building and office space from an energy perspective. We've totally kind of turned the energy model in those buildings on its head, and we're the first and only fully regulated and licensed energy supply company to offer an energy service from end to end, from bringing energy into a building, disseminating that to various occupiers within the building, and managing the whole billing process, including some help and guidance around sustainability, renewable energy, ESG. So that's what we do. And so that kind of topic of, is an office just an office, or can it be more, is really kind of at the heart of what we do when we think about kind of helping landlords and occupiers with managing more sustainable and efficient buildings from an energy perspective. And I'm joined today by two of our guests. So Simon, I'll start with you to let you introduce.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm Simon Durbin. I'm the Operations Director for Unify Solutions, sort of sister company to Unify Energy. We provide sort of tailored and bespoke FM solutions. Where we are different, or we believe we're different, is that we're really focused on a transparency approach. The FM market has for many, many years suffered from a poor perception of transparency and visibility on what end users or customers get. So we're trying to sort of challenge that a little bit.
And David?
Good morning, thank you. Yes, Dave Paul from Knight Frank. We are, I hate saying this, but I'm going to say we're kind of a global properties provider, but we're a partnership, so we feel like we're kind of a family-run business, but we have this kind of global presence. What do? We do everything related to commercial and residential property, from the office leasing and agency and development, which is probably my day-to-day role. So I do a lot of, I suppose when I'm sat here, we do a lot of design work with landlords. We do work with a lot of occupiers and advise them on the future of what they want to do within their real estate and how it really advances them. But then we do the cross-service business, as I'm sure people who I know in the room know. So yeah, multidisciplinary.
No, that's great. And I'm hoping that we're really going to have like an interesting perspective on what that return to the office looks like. We've got Simon from an FM perspective, myself kind of in terms of services in a building like energy and sustainability, which is really topical, and David yourself in terms of kind of the building itself, that kind of landlord element and managing agent element. And I know we've got some others in the audience from Overbury, for example, who do the fit out. So I think this kind of returning to the office and what that office is supposed to mean moving forward is something that we can have like a really good chat about. And so David, I'll start with you. What have you heard from colleagues or customers around kind of that return to the office and what's driving that?
When it was first discussed, when lockdown was ending, there was a big fear factor, to be honest, about how people were going to react, people's views and people's desires, and how COVID was going to affect their day-to-day working pattern. Everything from how they travel to the office, where they sat in the office, how clean was the office. And it's been something as I won't say it's a challenge, it's been a real experience actually to canvass those views, embrace those views. We're very fortunate, like a lot of businesses, we've always been very, very transient. So we've always offered a flexible working pattern, because 9 times out of 10 we're not in the office anyway. We're out seeing buildings or clients or traveling across the country. So everybody is mobile in that sense. So reacting to people's working day and to say, look, if you want to work from home, work from home. If you want to flex it. Our biggest concern, and I don't mean that in a dramatic sense, but our biggest concern has been how do our younger guys coming through learn? How do we educate them? Because we don't build anything. We don't design anything in that sense. So our guys their experience is built by sitting alongside us, listening to us, overhearing conversations, being able to sit down with them and run through things. Very, very similar to a lot of professional services businesses. And working remotely, bluntly, that doesn't happen. And it's really been difficult. So all the graduates that work for us at the moment in the Manchester office, it's been replicated across all our offices, have had their professional exams pushed out because they just haven't been able to get the experience enough yet to go into that environment with the confidence they're going to pass. So they're already 6 to 9 months behind. That's a concern for them, and it's a concern for us. It's a big worry for them. So return to office has been a key for them. And also, because we're multi-disciplined, we bounce a lot of ideas and thoughts and cross-selling within clients around the office when we're together. And as much as you can say, well, if you think of an idea, just ring a colleague, you may be at home. That does happen, but it's not instinctive.
No.
And we miss that as an industry, and we've certainly missed it as a business. So that was a concern, and how we bring those elements back in. But more importantly, it's alleviating our individuals, because they're, again, we don't make anything. So our key asset are our people, and therefore we have to make sure that they are comfortable with us. So throwing that blanket of comfort around them to say, look, do what you like. We're small enough to be able to monitor it, but we're big enough to give them the flex. So catering the real estate around that has been very simple. So that's about technology as much as anything else. So we're very fortunate as a business, every single person, including support staff through to partners in the office, have a laptop. And so the day we all got sent home, the next day we thought the world was going to end, what we're going to do, miraculously worked really well, and it's been really good since. So I know not everyone's been like that, and I know there's been some people who've had trials and tribulations, and I know my Wi-Fi at home has been tested to its extreme, with having 2 adults working there and 2 kids, and anyway, yeah, no, it's been a good experience actually after the initial thoughts that we went through. Yeah.
I think some really valid points there in terms of, and it's interesting to talk about graduates, and I suppose kind of individuals that have had more of a focus and a history of kind of working fixed and statically from an office, won't really kind of feel that impact. But I suppose graduates don't know anything different, so
Right.
so not kind of having that opportunity to learn or kind of absorb that kind of tacit knowledge from colleagues. That's potentially, they potentially think, well, this is how it is, because they didn't know anything differently.
Or don't have the confidence yet to pick up the phone and go, I don't really understand what that is.
Yeah.
And explain it to people. Some do, a lot don't.
Yeah.
And they pick more of the answers up by asking, perhaps more socially environment.
Absolutely.
Or by just listening.
Could be an evolving problem that we see the fallout of in kind of 5 to 10 years, when those individuals are supposed to become kind of seasoned senior leaders or senior kind of holders of positions in those businesses. Their whole learning experience development will be different.
I know, I hope not, but I agree with you, there might be.
Yeah.
I think it's inevitable there'll be a shortage or a gap in time, but it might go the other way. Actually, it might see these individuals grow quicker and faster, and because they've been thrown into the deep end a little bit.
It'll be interesting to see. I'm going to come back to you in a minute and talk about the kind of the client facing side. But Simon, just to jump to you on that, so you're obviously dealing with the requirements of occupiers within buildings regularly from an FM perspective. So have you seen a change in their requirements, or what are they asking for kind of in a post-pandemic return to the office?
The key bit we're seeing, Sarah, is requirement for flexibility. So a move away from a contract signed, put away into a drawer, and then just reviewed a contract review every 6 months. Certainly thinking about the beginning of the pandemic, which was ironically the day that Unify Solutions was launched. So but we can't be associated with the pandemic beyond that. The phone was obviously then ringing in terms of people saying, well, we won't be in our office, we want flexibility, we need to reduce our services. So a huge shift in what we're seeing is flexibility requirements. We're also seeing a real drive for transparency of information and almost proof points of the delivery of service, where again, I think historically probably people have been in the office, they've seen things happening, because even when people have been occupying, there are FM tasks that need to be completed for statutory compliance and all really dull stuff that we have to do, but it still has to happen whether an office is being used or not. So I think that the transparency and flexibility are the key bits. We're absolutely now starting to see a focus on pricing. I think businesses are coming through this. I think this has made people realise that they can now work more flexibly. They're now questioning whether they need these services, and they're trying to sort of call them down almost on demand, which is a real challenge in the FM market because most models aren't set up in that way. And so that's an interesting challenge that we're grappling with, specifically around things such as cleaning, as David sort of mentioned at the beginning. That is a real focus at the moment everywhere, giving people the comfort and employees that come back to an office space requires them to have that confidence that it is a clean and safe space to be in. And certainly over the last couple of months, we've been providing a significant amount of advice to customers in terms of here's some of the stuff that you can do. And again, just to caveat that, there is a lot of scaremongering in the market as well at the moment. And so what we do see, unfortunately, are some companies selling things that, you know, customers either firstly don't believe they require. As an example, we'll have people selling a weekly fogging service to a customer because it's perceived that that will make the office a really safe place. Well, actually, when you read the white papers and when you look at the data behind it, it's just an unnecessary expense. So I think flexibility, transparency, and that ability to call down services as and when required, rather than a contracted model for the 3 key bits we see.
And are you seeing similar things in terms of what clients are asking for? So I appreciate you're saying you don't build anything, you don't, but
Yeah.
so you're dealing with clients' requirements on a daily basis. So what are they asking for? Are they asking for different things than they were previously?
So pre-COVID, there was there's always been a flight to quality of space, which is not rocket science. People always will go and try and acquire an office space, the best space they can afford. But now it's gone absolutely off the scale, and it's mainly because people want to adopt a policy within their business that their real estate has a driving effect on recruitment of staff, retention of staff, and the space is really dictating a lot of that. And it then, at the moment with COVID coming in, as we're talking about in terms of how much clean air is coming to the building, how the building is reacting in terms of amenity space. What the communal areas like, all of this is being I suppose superimposed into new designs quicker than ever before. So we've accelerated hugely on design purposes. So clients are really demanding now about everything other than the 4 walls of the office they're sat in. So I was in London last 2 days with a developer looking around showering facilities, lockers, drying rooms, cycle storage, yoga rooms, everything not office space, around about a dozen office buildings, and that seems to be the daily pattern at the moment. And what we're finding is developers trying to do more than previously, and it's not just linking into sustainability and ESG, which is obviously clearly a huge part of the delivery of real estate at the moment. It's actually just, as you said, it's answering to what the clients are demanding. And previously, a larger corporate occupier would incorporate a lot of those points into their own space and pay for them. But now the landlord is providing those as part of a base build of a building, which they don't charge rent for, but people are prepared to pay a higher rent on the office element because the building's got those amenities.
Yeah.
So we're seeing, hopefully, touch wood, a positive curve now because construction costs are going through the roof.
Yeah.
Because the availability of things like steel, for example, which you can't get hold of. But rents previously haven't been catching up to a pace that makes it viable. But now, because buildings are being designed with all of these elements catered in, corporates who have their own ESG agendas in place, I'll give you a quick example in a second, are prepared to and will in the very near future going further to pay a higher rent to have that type of building. So, no confidentiality, so it's very quickly. But there is one particular very large accounting practice at the moment, not in Manchester, although they are in Manchester, but looking elsewhere. And they've been very bold and come out and said they will not sign a new lease on a building that runs past 2029 unless it is carbon neutral in terms of operational. I won't bore everybody in terms of the difference between embodied and
operational carbon.
Because we could be here forever.
Yeah, you would.
But certainly they put a real big marker down saying they will not commit to anything past that date unless it is carbon neutral operation.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that quite a lot actually in terms of, I think there's a danger there because I don't think all clients actually really understand necessarily what that means.
I agree.
So they go to the market and they ask for it without kind of really being able to tease out where it's real, where it's tangible, you know, the kind of the pros and cons. But again, that's another topic that we could probably go down and wrap it up on. No, that's really interesting, and I think I certainly would agree that that's what we're, you know, we as Unify Energy work with developers and landlords, and we're seeing that a lot, and that commitment and that kind of almost additional revolution in the kind of development
So one I learned yesterday, which was fascinating in the property sector, which has accelerated even in the last 6 months, is a developer in London, which will now be just domino effect, it will just roll out through the UK, is putting as many electric scooter charging points as they are cycle racks.
Okay.
There's no car parking, by the way. There'll be buildings built in the next wave development in Manchester with 0 car parking, and they don't need car parking. But they'll
I think we need to update those electric scooter rules though with GM if that's going to be the case. Needs to.
But it's not just for people who are based in the building, but they're providing dedicated charging points, visiting people visiting the building on an electric scooter.
Yeah.
To be fair, it's not new. It's on the west coast of America. It's been happening for years, but and we're playing catch up a little bit. But certainly, this is the norm now.
That's really interesting, and so it's definitely happening in the developer world, and we can see that in terms of the building fabric and, you know, the additional ancillary services that are being offered that are driving those rents in the right way to make that whole process what clients want sustainable. But what we see more from a supply chain perspective, because I suppose that's the area that you play into a little bit more. You know, you work at FM, and that's quite a monolithic kind of archaic industry traditionally. Is that side of things, is the supply chain that's supplying kind of additional services into a building that's not kind of bricks and mortar and traditional building services, is that catching up as quickly?
I don't think it's catching up as quickly, in all honesty. I think that it is being led by clients, and so clients in general have their own sustainability agendas, and they'll have their own policies that they're trying to achieve and targets they're trying to get to. And I think that through the procurement exercises that companies are taking is driving supply chains into a position where they have to respond to it. I'm not convinced that there are many businesses out there that are absolutely doing this because it feels like the right thing to do, or it's part of their sort of embedded into how they do business. So from our perspective, we are working and starting to work with even more suppliers, and that's a key driver for us in terms of, you know, whether, you know, they're NZC or whether they've got an agenda they're driving to. There are some sort of lower level commitments is what I guess I'll talk about in terms of some suppliers. You know, you'll see the odd electric van pottering around the streets of Manchester. My personal view, I think there is an element of tokenism that takes place and plays out in that marketplace because suppliers feel the need to be seen to be doing things. But I'm not convinced that as an FM industry we've managed to fully grasp the nettle on it and understand the sort of major part that we can play in it. And so I guess in summary, I think there is a tinkering around the edges with it. But my cynical side probably says that's probably more so that companies can get a commercial benefit, or they can tick boxes on a procurement tender exercise, because what we are absolutely seeing through those procurement tender exercises that the scoring and the weighting is far higher for those companies that can demonstrate some element of green credentials, which again, awful phrase, because it can be sort of banded in any way you like, but that's my gut feel at the moment.
And kind of question to both of you, how much of that is kind of owned by the occupier, and how much of that is shifting, or do you feel that there's a greater emphasis, kind of in line with what you were saying in terms of, you know, additional rents, kind of, you know, driving that market forward? There's definitely, I think, a bigger expectation now compared to a decade ago in terms of what services a landlord is kind of in partnership bringing into a building so that their occupiers can kind of benefit from that. So how do you define what's the responsibility of the occupier versus what's the responsibility of the building operator?
Personally, I think it's huge, because you'll work tirelessly to get a building to an environmental credential, which will have, for example, BREEAM outstanding. As soon as the occupier comes in, bashes around a bit, that goes out the window. So it's got to work hand in glove. Thomas and I were just chatting earlier, kind of talking about domestically. You know, it's all very well putting in ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps into houses. If you have no insulation, it's pointless. Yeah. So, you know, you've got the occupier has got to work in tandem with the landlord to produce his product. And I'm hoping as we're moving forward with this really stringent agenda that, again, cynically, is everyone going to stick to? Because there'll be a supply and demand curve that will hit at some point. And if the only operational buildings that are around don't hit those environmental criteria, what's an occupier going to do? Not have an office in Manchester or Liverpool or Leeds because they don't have a product there? Are they going to wait 3 years for it to be built? What are they going to do in the meantime?
And do you think occupiers are kind of, again, to both of you, do you think occupiers are connected to that enough, or, you know, is it very much kind of?
I smile a little bit because I agree with it. I think there's a lot of keeping up with the Joneses going on at the moment. And I think, again, as soon as one company comes out and says that their main four competitors, surprise, surprise, will be hot out in the press with their matching agendas or maybe slightly more advanced, and that's I mean that's natural. We've seen that in years for different ways. So there is a little bit of cynicism, but it depends really how strict we're going to be as a kind of PLC to make sure that everyone adheres to this. We've all seen it's always very prevalent at the moment with the COP happening, and lots of cynical views about it's all very well talking about it. Are they actually going to do what they say? And the actions will speak louder than words, as they say.
And Simon?
I think from our perspective, thinking about that holistic approach to a building is critical, whether it's around sustainability. To give you an example of that, if we go back to early days of pandemics, most buildings provided additional layers of cleanliness and cleaning that take place, which is great in the common areas. But actually, if the individual customer units within those buildings are operating to a different level, or the minute an individual steps out into a common area and they haven't sanitised hands or the office hasn't been cleaned, then you almost get that cross-contamination. And I guess you see the same around the sustainability agenda, where it's really important. To come back to sort of one of the points in terms of who looks after what, the responsibility bit, then sort of the general rule of thumb most people will work to is, you know, anything inside beyond your suite door is the occupiers to look after and your full responsibility. Although I'm sure David will have some really quirky bits where there'll be some red line plans where there's a bit over there that's demised and there's a bit over there that's demised. But that's your general rule of thumb of thinking about what is your responsibility and what should you be looking after.
One interesting point is that the market, read it all in the press, is dominated at the moment by the creative and tech sector, and within that is gaming. And the gaming industry are huge sappers of power because they need lots of power to operate, and they all sit there with 3 or 4 monitors, and that means they need additional cooling to relate to that. Now, if you're going down the ESG stability route, you're building a building with opening windows, with very less power input into the building per head, and more fresh air, but less mechanical workings to push it. They don't work. These two don't work. So at the moment, you've got a huge influx of gaming companies want to taking more office space, want to base the city centre from a recruitment point of view, because their average age of employee is probably somewhere between 23 and 26. And they don't want to be based out of town. They want to have the little trappings of what the city centre lifestyle offers them. But the spec of the existing office buildings at the moment don't comply to what they need. And in the future, certainly won't, unless their working practices change, which you're not sure how that's going to happen. So there's going to have to be some change by the occupier to work in tandem with their own environmental sustainability criteria, never mind the government's.
I think there also needs to be a bit of realism, though, from a government perspective in terms of what that guidance and legislation kind of says. So certainly in the world that we operate in, there's a lot of confusion around energy intensity versus carbon intensity, and a lot of the schemes at the moment that kind of, and we've talked about this all the time, that are, you know, are branding NZC, they're really focused on a reduction of energy usage. I'll be honest, I don't agree with that. It's in line with what you kind of just said. You know, our energy requirements are going to increase, not decrease. You've got chargers for scooters, chargers for cars, you know, companies that are more reliant on automation and tech. So I think it's about reducing the carbon impact rather than reducing the usage necessarily. And I think a lot of schemes, NZC schemes, are a little bit perverse in terms of the behaviour that they're driving at this stage, because it's a bit of a let's catch up really quickly and just reduce everything. I think we need to kind of focus, and we did a podcast for COP26 recently, and we kind of said, you know, go back to reduce, reuse, recycle, because we're in danger of really overcomplicating this. And I think you have to look at what you can reduce in terms of wastage. But if you've got a genuine increase in your need for energy, you have to address that. There's no point in pretending that it's, you know, that it's not there. So I think there's a little bit of confusion happening and kind of.
And the healthy debate in London yesterday, as we were walking around these buildings, is the double whammy effect. Whereas, quite rightly, most majority of companies, us included, being totally flexible about people's working week where they work, but we can't accommodate an office environment that says only 6% come in between Monday and Friday, and no one's there on a Friday. I can't say to our landlord, I don't pay rent on a Friday because no one's coming in.
Yeah,
So I've got to have an office.
absolutely.
But then 30% of the week people are working from home. So from an environmental point of view, I've still got my lights on,
Absolutely.
my heating, my cooling on in the office. And whoever's working from home has got similar at home, which is probably not insulated as well as it could be.
Absolutely.
So at some point we're running, and buses are still running, and trains are still running, even though not everyone's using them. There's got to be a realignment at some point to match either the revised working week or people back in the working environment. We're back to where we were pre-COVID. And I'm not saying that's right, by the way. I'm just saying it doesn't seem
It doesn't
to work
align. No, I completely agree. And we kind of had a little bit of a, my kind of hedger and trader at Unify Energy, we had a little bit of a kind of a joke about that when the recent kind of energy prices got really bad, and we thought, no one will want to work from home now. Everybody was thinking, to heck with that. I'm not paying to heat my house at home when my boss is paying to heat my office. But and that, there's a personal kind of piece there for individuals, because that cost impact in terms of the increase in energy costs recently is very real and will be very impactful for families. But from a sustainability perspective, you're totally right. Those two things really, really don't align. And if you were simply looking from a sustainability perspective, those buildings have to be maintained whether they're occupied or not, in terms of the building fabric.
I got called out through the week. I was on a round table, virtual round table I think it must have been last November, December, but it definitely was December. And I got asked the question, when do I think the trigger point will be that everyone will want to go back to office? And I said, tongue in cheek, when they all get their electricity bill like
absolutely, yeah.
Which is like 4 times the normal thing.
Yeah.
And but next week it was all across the property week. Industry expert says, that's music.
It's a controversial. It's a controversial perspective because it's a controversial topic. But yes, there's total kind of truth in it. And in terms of managing that fluctuating demand and not really being able to plan for that, what does the FM world do in that instance? I know there's a lot of kind of ode to technology rather than necessarily completely embedded technology in that industry. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's really interesting just listening to David there in terms of the services that a building requires. Most occupiers have the same level of service Monday to Friday, whether there is 100% occupancy or 50%. So again, that inefficiency of people are still moving around, our cleaning teams are still going to work and getting on a bus and all those things, that's still happening anyway. I think there is some technology out there that can help us in terms of sensor technology, smart buildings, all those elements that give us some great data. What we're seeing in the market, again, that sort of keeping up with the Joneses, is people throwing loads of sensors into buildings and starting to gather data, but then really sadly not actually doing anything with it, not sharing it with their supply chains, not talking to their supply chain, having it as an expectation in terms of let's review this in collaboration, let's talk through how can services be provided differently. And as Sarah alluded to, the FM industry is very, very traditional, and it is easier for the FM industry to set something up in a certain way and then just set it off for 3 years and just review and check, rather than flex. We were having an interesting conversation, well, I thought it was interesting anyway, in relation to, how do you provide cleaning on a sort of Uber style basis of a customer has absolute control and can call it down on demand when they need it. So that notion of, I need more on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday because I'm at 90% occupancy versus Mondays and Fridays are the 50% occupancy, and how you can then grapple with that with employment law and how to have that flexibility of workforce and still treat people in the right way with respect. Because again, it's fair to say the FM industry, has a reputation for minimum wage, 0 hours contracts, flexibility. And I suppose I should at least say, step away and say, we don't do any of that in Unify. We are a real living wage employer and always will be, and we don't operate 0 hours contracts. But there's some real challenges out there, and I think where we can crack that flexibility while still engaging with employees and looking after them and treating them respectfully, that's where there'll be wins for both FM companies that can do that and the client bases that will be able to have a more flexible service and therefore a more flexible cost base as well.
So I think there's kind of so many points made by everybody that we could tease out and probably talk for hours and hours, but we'll probably run out of time at some point to do that. Has anybody got any questions or thoughts based on kind of what we've, I know there's been quite a lot of engagement and some of the things that have been said. Questions? Yeah. Any final remarks?
What I've just said from the FM side is as occupiers have come back to the office, it's happening pre-COVID, to be fair, because they're driving hard. They want the best quality of office space they can find and the best sort of customer-led service they can find in an office development. Because most people have signed 5 to 10 year commitments, and their business has changed within that period, and they want their real estate to change in line with that. And often that's not been the case, but now it is, which is good. So people are prepared to pay for the FM services because they see it now as an open book. Previously, they go, how much? That's ridiculous, without having any quantum knowledge about what it meant. But now they want to see an open book and understand what they're getting for it, and they're prepared to pay more for the right service. And I think also, when we weren't alone on this, far from it, but when lockdown happened, we've had kind of from a, what they call it, from a kind of moral point of view, we've had the same cleaning contract company clean our offices across 3 regions for the past 25 years. And the team that have done our office have done it, probably the individuals have done it for the past 15 years. So all through lockdown, we kept them on, not because we just wanted the office cleaning, because we felt it was the right thing to do. I know that's probably been replicated on a lot of different FM contracts, which has been brilliant to see from a business point of view. But it's all about service. Everything's about service at the moment, and the better service will be paid for. And if it costs more, people will pay for it.
I think we're certainly in my world, and I know Simon in yours, we're seeing kind of flavours of that. But certainly at times, I suppose, tokens to that rather than kind of fully embracing it. What you said just there about kind of you know, morally doing the right thing and kind of people kind of the heart of what you do probably really resonates with you, Simon. You know, what was the approach from Unified Solutions perspective in terms of people first and real living wage? And
yeah, absolutely. So real living wage is part of people first, but it's only one part of people first. And to sort of pick up on where David finished in terms of our approach through the pandemic. Yes, we furloughed an awful lot of our team, probably 75% of our team, but actually we topped up their wages to 100% because for us it was the right thing to do. And equally, we took a bit of a hit commercially because of that. So we didn't go and ask our customers for that. You know, if a customer said, I'd like to turn off the service completely and I don't want to come for the next 6 months, that's what we did. We didn't pull out a contract and say, you know, you committed to 12 months, 18 months, because it's just not the right thing to do.
That's right.
And that's stood us in real good stead, because what we're actually seeing now is a real bow wave of people saying, yeah, we remember that back in April 2020, and now we're back in the office and we're just back in 2 days a week and we're just feeling our way a little bit. Can you service us? Well, absolutely, yeah, we can service you. And we're seeing more and more of that. So when we took that decision, it wasn't only a commercial decision as to why we took it, but actually there are real commercial benefits in seeing that. And so, you know, the phrase all about the people, you'll see that plastered on everybody's website, and you'll see smiley pictures of people. When I'm talking to people and they're saying, well, we're not quite sure which supplier to use, who should we go to? I always say to them, go and look on Glassdoor, go and look at employee reviews, go and see what people who work in that company actually think of that business. That'll give you a real feel for whether the glossy brochure that is being presented to you by a sales professional matches the reality of what's happening. And if you can get those 2 things to align, they're probably going to be a good supplier to work with. So it's a really good place to go and get that.
Talking to them is the right thing to do. Don't do the TripAdvisor route where we all hunt for that, you know.
Yeah.
You've got the 1 star, even though you have 5,000, 4 or 5 out of 10s. Oh no, you've had one of those, which doesn't feel right. But you're right. And it's good now. I think actually over the past 12, 18 months, we've got more people check us out, talk to us and talk to our teams than ever before. So I think that's happening, which is great.
It's good to see.
Because if you're doing it right, you want to talk to you want to talk to people, don't you?
Yeah. And then it's also being aware that when you ask a supplier for a testimonial from a customer, of course they'll tell you the one that really rates and one that's worked for 25 years.
That's right.
Or, yeah, they won't tell you about the ones that don't. So again, if you can seek out other people that are working with that supplier and solicit the use of them informally, then again, you'll get I always call it the unvarnished truth, and you'll be able to see beyond the glossy brochure.
so if there's one kind of thing that either kind of supply chain into kind of buildings or buildings themselves needed to kind of continue offering occupiers moving forward in what feels, without using some of the really cliche terminology, what feels like a different working environment? What would that be?
For me, I think what we're seeing occupiers ask for more and more is just transparency. And I know I probably overused that word today, but it is a sort of cornerstone of how we choose to operate. Because through transparency, you build trust, and you then build collaborative relationships and partnerships where, you know, people work with you because they want to work with you, not necessarily because you're the cheapest, not necessarily because you're the biggest, but because they've got that collaborative relationship whereby you provide them with what they actually want, rather than just presenting them with the one single solution. That is how the FM business can operate.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And David?
Don't challenge, constructively challenge. Don't settle for the norm. Don't settle for what worked previously. Because if everyone sat back and just, it worked previously, carry on doing what we do, that we're never going to influence change. And that's the problem. We're great talkers. It's actually doing what you say you should do. So proper commitment. There's loads of chat within lots of industries, ours alone, about, for example, everyone wants to qualify and gets a company car allowance and goes and buys a car. Is that right? Should we be doing that? Or should we actually be financially incentivizing people not to do that? Or buy an electric vehicle rather than buying a combustion engine? So we are challenging, we're asking everybody to challenge, not just our employees, but our clients and people who work alongside. And I think everyone in this room, just don't sit back and take the norm as the right approach. Challenge it.
And how can occupiers and landlords work together to kind of challenge that? You know, how far into kind of productizing
Goes
you know,
back to that flexibility point.
Yeah.
It's not having set contracts, or if you have a contract, change it.
Yeah.
Just because you sign a contract for 10 years saying you're going to do the same thing, it's not right, because the world is changing so quickly in every shape and form. Why financially, real estate has only really worked previously when people have been prepared to sign long-term contracts to get that longevity of income, and therefore the value of the investment. Else you don't build anything. That's got to change. And the irony is, you build a Renica tower of 600 units and people rent them out for a year. They could lay dormant for 4 years.
Yeah.
Financially, that's viable. So there's a lot of work that needs to go in between the commercial and residential investment vehicles. It's the same pension companies are buying the same product. So how come buying a residential tower is viable compared to a commercial tower? There's a lot more in that, but on principle, that doesn't really make sense. So it's understanding and challenging why is an occupied, do I have to sign a 5-year term or a 10-year term? Why can't I sign 1 year and change things? And it might be a situation where it's more an option than an agreement to walk away. So there's an option is you can change an element of your contractual arrangement with a flexible parameters between it. So you're still tied in, but you can change things around. There's got to be something different. We can't do what we always did because that's how it worked previously. It's not my granddad. It's just everyone's. First of all, we don't have to change, do we? There's no reason why we shouldn't. And certainly now, I was just chatting to an old mate of mine. I was walking over here, and he was moaning at me about recruitment and can't find the right people. And he like me has been at his respective firm for over 20 years. And understandably, and I agree now, rightly, a lot of people out there don't want to be at the same firm for 20 years. They want to experience new challenges, new businesses, new countries to work in because they can. So we've got to be flexible on the side of it. So I think flexibility and adapting to what an occupier, because all an occupier does is adapt to what their employees want. So it's a kind of a chain of events.
Chain of events, absolutely.
And if your occupier leaves the building, that's not to help your landlord. So your landlord can stand there all day going, I'm not doing that, I'm not prepared to change them. But ultimately they'll leave the building. And that can be anything from the services they provide to the rent they charge. So it's all about flex, adaptability. But if you don't challenge it and sit there and moan about it, as some people do, then you won't affect change.
Yeah. So transparency, challenge, and flexibility, I think, is what we're kind of concluding with in terms of, what more can your office and your building give you kind of moving forward in a slightly new era. So I think if there's no other questions, we'll leave it there.